around. All right, we're going to get started here. So today we're going to be talking about the real reason that you are stuck and you cannot change. So if this is your first time joining me, make sure that you stick around to the end. I'm going to be doing some Q&A at the end of it. So today I'm going to be going through the training. If you're on TikTok, thank you for liking the live and sharing, and same thing on Facebook. If you're live, type in #live. If you're watching the replay, type #replay. Now, for those of you that don't know, I will be moving these trainings over to the Happiness Coach private Facebook group, and I'm going to be doing the trainings in there. So if you're not part of that group, and there's special posts and insights and stuff like that that are in there, I've got 8 modules. They're really short, like 10-15 minutes each, so it's not like a massive thing. I like to keep it short. So I've got training in there, and you're definitely going to want to check that out. So that is the Happiness Coach Facebook group. Okay? So today, the real reason that you're stuck and you can't change. Have you ever been in those situations where you know that you're supposed to do something, you know you have tried a bunch of different things, whether it's maybe losing weight, going to the gym, quitting smoking, quitting drinking, quit biting your nails, whatever it is that you have that's a bad habit. And you know that you're supposed to change these things, and maybe you do for a little while, but then you fall back into those same old patterns and the behaviors. And today we're going to be talking about why that's happening and why you get stuck in that cycle. And we're going to dive deep on those kind of things. And there is training in the Facebook group that does help expand on this. But we're going to be talking about the first 2 stages of grieving, actually. And you're like, what has grieving got to do with change? Well, any change that we go through, it's a change in our identity. So maybe before we were a smoker, I used to be a smoker many, many years ago. Now I am not, and it doesn't even cross my mind. It is a permanent change. It's not something that I am tempted by or I might revert back to, right? So this is something that is a permanent ongoing change. It is something that is no longer who I am. I'm not a smoker. I don't identify with being a smoker anymore. Yet I used to smoke like a pack and a half, 2 packs a day. And that was back when you were allowed to smoke in the office. So a couple of years ago, just a little bit. Okay. So anything that we are struggling with, that we're wanting to change, yet we find that we're stuck and we keep going back to old behaviors. There's reasons for this. And one of the things that is so painful, in fact, the greatest pain that we can have, is when we live or we act or behave outside of alignment with who we truly are, what our true values are, and our true thoughts and beliefs. When we behave contrary to that value, it will cause us pain. The problem is we get stuck in these situations, and the reason that we are doing the things that we know we shouldn't do is because we don't have a better way. And you're like, yeah, but Tina, I do know the better way, I just don't do it. There's a deeper reason underneath that stuff, and this is why it's important to go through and understand our emotions, where they come from, and do this deeper inner work so that we can make true lasting change. And so let's go over, where's my pen? Okay, so on one side we've got denial. Okay? So denial, I talk about denial as, it stands for don't even know I am lying. Okay, so we're not aware that we're in pain, that it's not a problem. We'll say things like, oh, it's not a big deal. I'll just let it go. I'm just gonna have one, one drink, one phone call to somebody you shouldn't call, and you're gonna find yourself in that same old situation again. It might be, I'm just gonna have one drag off the cigarette, and that happened when I was quitting smoking, right? There were four of us. We went for hypnosis, and two of us quit, two of us didn't. And I was one of the ones that quit. My mom was one of the ones that quit. It helped that we were in the same environment, that there were no other smokers. The ones that did, that they said, oh, I'm just going to have one drag off the cigarette, or I'm just going to have one cigarette, right? When they found themselves in that situation, and then they reverted back to their old behavior, and they continued to be smokers. Whereas we continue to be non-smokers. So, but denial is, we're not aware that we're in pain. And why? Why aren't we aware? Because we have found a coping mechanism of some sort that allows us to deny the pain or distract us from the pain. This could be, humans are so adaptable, we will find anything that is good for us, that is a potential solution, and we will do it to such extremes that it becomes a problem for us. Our solutions end up becoming a problem. And so whether that's, you come home and you're really stressed after a really tough day at work, and you decide to have a drink to relax. And guess what? It works. You relax and you forget about your problems and you feel happier, and you're like, oh, okay. And so then maybe you don't do it for a little while, and then you do it again, and then again, and again, and again. And that's when it becomes a problem, and instead of a solution. But it's not really a real solution, and that's why we can't actually change our behaviors, is because we're putting a band-aid fix on the situation. We aren't digging down and figuring out the true root cause of what the emotions are behind it, and what it is that we are feeling and why we're feeling that, and putting in a true action plan to actually allow us to change our behaviors. Okay? And there's a reason for that, okay? Is because the second stage after you come out of denial is anger. And what do I talk about? If this isn't your first time, if this is your first time on my channel and you haven't seen me before, my name is Tina, and I am a happiness coach. I do have lots of training that covers this concept that I'm going to be talking about, but anger is the first stage of fear. So when you think of fight or flight, if somebody hurts you with something, oftentimes our first reaction is like, what the fuck? Like, we get upset, we get angry, we want to fight. And so after we come out of denial, which is numbing the pain and distracting ourselves from the pain or the situation, then coming out of that, the next stage is anger. And if we don't know how to deal with our anger properly in a way that is constructive, we have this whole decision gap that ends up and I often talk about this too. I call it the fuck it point, where you're just like, you know what, I can't deal with this problem anymore, and we say, fuck it, for whatever reason that we can't deal with this, and we go back to our old coping mechanisms, our old behaviors, even though we know they are self-destructive, even though they are going to keep us stuck, and they are not going to move us forward, and we just don't care anymore, because we're angry, and we're in fear, and we don't know how to address that, so we have no choice but to go back into denial. And that means going into our self-destructive habits, our coping mechanisms that keep us stuck and keep us not being able to move forward. And this is the real barrier, is the anger of not being able to know how to process that in a constructive way. And we end up saying little things like, it's not a big deal. I don't want to, cause a fuss about it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, these are all very subtle things because, we have to pick and choose our battles. We can't fight every little thing, every little detail, or every little thing that makes us upset. And sometimes these pathways to denial actually sound quite logical, and they are reasonable in the way that we, thanks John, and the way that we actually deal with that is like, it's not a big deal. I don't want to, they're in a good mood or they're in a bad mood. I don't want to, rock the boat. I'm just going to let it go. Or I'm feeling tired. I probably shouldn't address this, or I'm going to be too angry. I'm going to blow up. I'm going to get frustrated, and then I'm going to cause more damage. So I don't know how to deal with my anger, so I'm going to go back into denial. I'm just going to let it go. So now, that's not always a bad thing, because for me, there's times where my temper, when that flares up, it's best for me to STFU, shut the fuck up, don't say anything. I have to sit with those feelings. I have to understand and process, where are these coming from? What is the fear behind it? When I do that, then I'm able to deal with the angry feelings in a much more constructive way, rather than a self-destructive way. Okay, so when we find ourselves saying those little things, how is it that I want you to think about that. How is it that you deal with the anger when you're angry or frustrated about something? What's the pathway that you use? What are the things that you say that take you back to the denial, the coping mechanism, right? Is it, I don't want to upset the kids, I don't want to fight, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that, or you just say, fuck it, I don't care, I'm done. You know what, I'm just going to have a beer, or I'm going to have a glass of wine, or you know what, I'm eating that cheesecake, I don't care, right? So those are some of the things that I know for me are a sign that I am heading back to the denial path. But what I want you to understand about denial is I don't even know that I'm lying. So we get into this behavior, and the reason that we do this is because we don't know another way to solve the anger issue. We are frustrated, we're in a state of fear, we don't know how to fix this. And so to go into denial is actually a protection mechanism, okay? It is not something that we are consciously choosing. So when I say it's a decision gap, this can happen very, very fast, okay? And this can happen based on trauma, okay? Now, I know trauma gets thrown a lot around, and I've been through a lot, and we're not going to be diving too deep into that. So for the sake of this particular training, I'm going to define trauma as an event that triggers an extreme emotional response, okay, or an emotional response. Doesn't necessarily have to be a big one. So that's big T trauma. So, imagine getting into a car accident, right? That is a physical trauma, and maybe it shakes you, it rattles you to the core. You almost died, but you're still here, and your body will take you into denial as a coping mechanism, right? They call it shock when you go into shock about something. So that is because you are feeling so much overwhelming emotions, you don't know how to deal with it, and so you shut it down. And we have a ton of different coping mechanisms to shut our own emotions down because we are not able to deal with it. So when I talk about trauma, it is an event that causes an emotional reaction within us that we are not able to deal with. Now, the car accident is a big T trauma. Small T trauma could be something like maybe a customer or coworker or your boss pissed you off and you're angry, but you can't deal with that. You can't just shout that out. So you shut those feelings down, right? So you have to go into a denial state. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because you don't want to be fighting with everybody all the time. But at the same time, if you don't go back and process those emotions in a proper way and address and understand and dig down to the root cause, you're going to find that you're going to go back into that cycle. And that shit's going to come back up, and then you're going to get frustrated again, and then one of those times you aren't going to be able to shift yourself into denial, and you're going to blow up in anger. So this is why a lot of times when we let stuff go, we let stuff go, we let stuff go, and then it's like a pressure cooker, and then we explode. And then we feel bad, and then we go back into denial. So these are things that we have to be aware of. Is denial is anytime we're not aware of the pain that we're in. And then we could only do this for so long before we end up shifting into anger, because we can't stay in denial. We are in pain, but we don't know that we're in pain. And just because we don't know that we're in pain doesn't mean that it isn't causing damage to us. Okay? So this is why it's really important, because we will keep repeating these patterns, and we will not only repeat them, we will do them in such a way that it will be the law of diminishing returns. So any addiction, any way of coping, all of a sudden it doesn't have that same soothing effect for us. So let's go through the actual addiction cycle, right? And you might be like, Tina, I'm not addicted to anything. I'm not addicted to drinking. I'm not addicted to drugs. Maybe it's overeating. Maybe it's people pleasing. Maybe it is work. Maybe it's gambling. Maybe it's video games. Whatever it is, we can find a ton of different ways. Why is this not coming off? So sorry, I'm talking with my back to you. We can find so many different ways to actually cope with the emotions that we're dealing with. And this can be a good thing for short term, but not digging in. It's like you continually ignore a problem. Imagine being in a business where you know your customer's pissed off, you get them to calm down, you give them the treat, but you don't actually say you give them a free dessert to kind of get them to calm down and deal with the emotions. But you don't actually go back and actually understand what the problem was, why it happened, and fixing that and digging down into how can we do this better. Well, that customer's going to come in, the same stuff's going to happen, and guess what? You try to give them a dessert again, and they're going to be like, fuck you. Like, I want you to fix the thing that you are not fixing. And that is what ends up happening with us. So the cycle of addiction, or in this case, we're going to call it self-destructive behaviors, because it can be anything that is self-destructive for us. And maybe it's not getting enough sleep, right? I'm guilty of these things. And I'm talking from my own personal experience, and I share these things not because I'm perfect, but because I've been there, done that, bought the t-shirt. Okay, so first we have the trigger, or the situation that has happened. And then the next thing that happens is we have the decision gap. Now, if you've been through a lot of trauma in your life, and these are normal repeated behaviors for you, you may not think that you're actually making a decision. You might think, well, I can't help it. This is just the way I am. Or I can't help that I have this illness, or I have this thing that happens, or whatever it is. If we're saying that we can't help it, I can promise you, you can. It's a matter of shifting the perspective of and understanding at which point are we making that decision and understanding why we're making those decisions. And this can be a bit of a challenge when you first start to do it. And I started to become aware. And one of the things that I did was when I found myself where I made that decision where I choose between either the decision gap is we either choose to address it in a healthy way, address emotions, okay? Or we choose to go back into denial. And you're like, but I'm not choosing denial, Tina. I'm well aware that, you know what, this sucks, I'm miserable, this is painful. Because remember, the whole reason that we are going into denial, while we're choosing the path of denial, is because we're in pain. And fear and anger, I erased that already. Fear and anger has us, we're like, I can't cope with that. So we go into our denial and we find the only ways that we know how. So this isn't that we're doing things wrong, is we're using the wrong tools to solve the problem, okay? And it's like going to a hardware store looking to buy a loaf of bread and wondering why they don't have bread, but hey, they have crackers. So I'm going to eat crackers, but what I really needed was bread, okay? So it's kind of that analogy. So if we go back into denial, that is going into our self-soothing behaviors. And this can be anything, right? Maybe it's like, okay, maybe your self-soothing behavior, it starts out as a good thing, right? Maybe it's like, okay, I'm going to go to the gym, right? And you're like, okay, that actually made me feel better. But if it gets all distorted and you still don't deal with those emotions, you will still find yourself not processing this in a way that's actually healthy, that allows you to make a true change, right? So you have to be able to identify, okay, how often am I going through this cycle? So it's not necessarily wrong. So like example, having a drink is not necessarily wrong, but if you are doing this on a consistent basis, here's the real reason why it becomes a problem, is that we self-soothe with whatever coping mechanism that we use, and it's not always starts out as a bad thing. Sometimes it's a good thing and it actually works and it's effective. And the reason we do this stuff is because it works. We feel better. And we forget about our problem for a little while. It's not so bad. We forget about the pain and we feel better. And so what ends up happening is we haven't addressed the problem. We've just forgotten about it. We distracted ourselves from the problem. So guess what's going to happen? Because we didn't actually solve the problem, we're going to get triggered again. We're going to have the same situation. Work's going to be shitty. You're going to fight with your spouse. You're going to fight with your friends, or, traffic's going to piss you off. Whatever it is going to happen again. Because we didn't actually figure out what the true problem was. And we didn't deal with any of our emotions. We just distracted ourselves from the emotions rather than having the hard conversation with ourselves and understanding, where is this coming from? Now, again, if you don't know how to deal with those emotions, you have no choice but to default back into denial. And that is our protection mechanism. That is our coping mechanism. And what we need to understand and what we need to do to be able to help ourselves to change and actually move through this is, number one, is know that denial is a protection mechanism. when we find ourselves in this repeated cycle of being in denial and doing the old coping mechanisms, being in this addictive cycle where we get triggered about something, and by trigger I mean that emotional issue or that big T, little t trauma, it doesn't matter what it is, you have these emotions that come up, you don't know how to deal with them, and sometimes it's something really innocent. It's like, you know what, I don't have time to deal with this because I need to get the kids ready for school, or I don't have time to deal with this, I need to get to the next meeting. So we distract ourselves. Any way that we're distracting ourselves from the emotion and not addressing it is something that will come back up. If it doesn't, then great, then it's not a big deal. It was just something in the moment. And the more that you get used to actually addressing and looking at the emotions, the less that you're going to have to be stuck in these addictive cycles, okay? Where addictive, self-destructive, whatever the behavior is, okay? So the second thing is learning how to process our emotions in a healthy way. And all emotions are good. They are signals, they are keys, they're ways of catching our attention to let us know that something is going on, and we need to learn how to identify those emotions, how to deal with those in a way that actually is healthy and helps us and doesn't do any harm to us and doesn't do any harm to others. Okay, so understanding that the emotions are just cues. And a lot of times why we get angry is because, and why we slip back into denial is because if we actually have to look at the emotions that we're feeling, then we actually have no choice but to try and solve the problem. So we often get stuck back and forth between denial, anger, denial, anger, denial, anger. And because of that, we slip back into denial because it's easier than raging. And raging is uncontrollable pain, okay? Uncontrollable hurt. So the third thing to help you get out of this is practicing unconditional love for ourselves and unconditional love for others. Now, this does not mean accepting unacceptable behavior. And guess what? You decide what's acceptable and what's not. And maybe somebody might look at you saying that you're being too harsh. Somebody else might look at you and say you're being too lenient. Whichever it is, it doesn't matter, because that's all a matter of perspective. The only thing that matters here is how is it affecting you? Because like I had started at the beginning, the greatest pain that we will cause ourselves is not to live in alignment with our true selves. Right? So if our true self is, we tend to be much more outgoing and aggressive and, competitive and stuff like that, and then we squish that down, then we're going to be in a lot of pain. If we are happy and bubbly and, just love everybody, and we have to squish ourselves down to be serious and, logical and all of that kind of stuff, then that's going to cause us pain. Now, it doesn't cause immediate pain. It depends on the time and frequency. How often are we living outside of who we truly are? If we are not in alignment, and do we even know who we truly are? That's a whole other training that we'll go through. But I wanted to highlight the difference between love and respect. And I personally think that respect is much more powerful than love. And you're like, but Tina, I thought love is the be all and end all. Aren't you the one that says love is the only thing that's real? Everything else is an illusion, right? Yes, absolutely. But here's the thing. Respect is so much more powerful, okay? Respect is more powerful because we actually have a choice, and it is conditional. Now, when you hear somebody say, oh, you just need to love yourself and be kind to yourself, and you're like, what the fuck does that mean, right? And does it mean I have to take a bubble bath? Do I go to a spa? What do I do? Like, what do you mean by loving myself? Well, what clicked for me and what made the difference for me is understanding the concept of respect. And respect means, am I respecting myself? Am I behaving in a way that aligns me with who I truly am? If I am, then at the end of the day, I have no problem looking at myself in the mirror, and I respect, I admire, I know I have treated myself with respect. So that means I have to understand, what do I value? What do I feel is a good behavior? What do I feel is a bad behavior? And we are all guilty of doing things that we are not so proud of, that we maybe don't respect about ourselves. And the problem is the longer we operate and we behave in ways where we are not respecting ourselves, the more we will feel angry and frustrated with ourselves. And if we can't deal with that, then we have to go through this addiction cycle, and we're going to go into denial, okay? Because we don't know how to process that. And so when we are respecting ourselves, what we are doing is we're making conscious choices to behave in ways that are supportive and loving. Now, we all deserve unconditional love. Even the worst of us still deserve unconditional love. However, there's not unconditional respect. Respect is respecting ourselves and respecting those around us, respecting our home, respecting our environment, respecting our job, respecting the people that we live with. Those are very different things, right? And that can cause us to go out of alignment as well if we are not operating in a way that we are respecting ourselves. And we also have to address when people are not respectful of us. And that is a higher form of self-love, right? So this is something that is really, really important. And to me, it's akin to free will. Okay, so if we look at it in a bit of a spiritual sense, so God gives us free will. God doesn't force us to love him. He allows us to hate him. If he allows us not to believe in him. He doesn't force us to do anything. However, there are consequences. We cannot be in a state of love and happiness and bliss if we are continuing to operate outside of what is valued by God, right? So that is what in the Christian terms they call it sin, which is to miss the mark. And what we're missing the mark on is loving behavior for ourselves, loving behavior for others. And so free will and respect is something that is earned, okay? We have the ability to choose whether or not we will respect ourselves and whether or not we will respect those around us. And that is something that for me made much more sense than just love yourself, because I didn't quite understand what that meant, and I do stuff and it still didn't feel good, right? It's like, well, I went and I did these things that they said to do. I bought myself flowers, I went to the spa, I got a mani-pedi, I had a massage. Sure, those things felt good in the moment, but they're very short-lived. Because if you continue to behave in ways that you don't actually respect yourself, you don't actually like the way that you're behaving, and if you saw somebody else behaving in that same way, you'd be like, what is their problem? They're a terrible person, whatever it is, then you will feel pain. And it's pain that we cause ourselves because we are not living in a way that we actually respect ourselves. So if we want to find happiness, if we want to feel fulfilled, feel better, then we have to start acknowledging what ways are we out of alignment with respecting ourselves? What ways are the people around us out of alignment with them respecting us? And that can be challenging to really address those things, because it may mean having to really change things in a way that maybe we're not ready for. And if that's the case, if we're not ready for that change and we find ourselves in that denial behavior, you can't force somebody out of denial. You can't rip them out of denial. You can only love them out of denial. So if you find yourself in those repetitive, self-destructive behaviors, start looking at, what do I respect? And how close, what is the gap? How close am I to behaving in ways that I actually respect? So for example, I don't like losing my temper. And if I find myself in a way where I'm always losing my temper and I'm lashing out at people, I'm saying mean things, I'm not living in alignment with the things that I truly value. And so I need to actually start doing that inner work to understand why am I in this state of fear? Why am I feeling this anger? Where is this coming from? And starting to do that inner work so that I can get myself into that next stage, which is bargaining. But we'll save that training for another time. So guys, this is the training for today. I hope you found it helpful. If you haven't joined my Facebook group, The Happiness Coach, please request to join. Make sure you answer all of the questions. I'm going to be very selective who gets in that group, because I'm creating a safe environment for people to be able to share. I want everybody to make sure they've answered all the questions, they've read all the group guidelines and rules, so that we are all on the same page to create a safe space for everybody in that group. If you want to watch the replays of this, maybe you jumped in a little bit late, then you can go to my YouTube channel, which is Coach Tina B 125. Click on subscribe, and you'll get notified when I upload the replay. Okay? So guys, that's the training for tonight, and I hope you found this helpful, and yeah, have a great night, and we'll see you again next week. Bye.